Well, a new book explores Cape Town's crime underworld and sheds light on the operations of alleged mob boss Radovan Krejcir. Mandy Wiener's book is called Ministry of Crime and Underworld Explored. It follows her previous bestseller, Killing Brett Kebble and Underworld Exposed, which explored the mining magnate's murder. Mandy joins us now in studio. Thank you so much for coming through, Mandy. So I've been reading this book, and you know, your journalistic acumen and the experience of a broadcast journalist comes through. I mean, it reads really easily. The chapters are quite short and straight to the point, but it centers around this intriguing character. I don't know if intriguing is the correct word, of Radovan Krejcir. And from there, there's a whole lot of stories that you tell. What inspired this book?
Well, I suppose it really does take a look at the underworld over the last 10 years or so. So it kind of tracks the trajectory from the Kebble murder through to the arrival of Radovan Krejcir in the country in 2007 with a disguise and a pseudonym, and then through to what's happening in Cape Town at the moment with the turf war that's going on there. But I also wanted to tell the parallel narrative of what's been happening in the criminal justice system. So there are many different stories and these different narratives that I've tried to weave together, because you can't tell the story of organized crime and the underworld in the country without telling the story about how law enforcement agencies have been deliberately hollowed out and eviscerated in a deliberate campaign over the past few years.
In fact, as you refer to that, one of the things that I was reflecting on as I was reading the book, that perhaps the intention of that hollowing out of law enforcement and the criminal justice system, while the intention may have been political, the direct consequences that it has weakened other things that perhaps on the face of it have nothing to do with politics, but have to do with our own safety and security as a country.
Well, that is precisely what happened. So there was a political campaign, and we saw people like Burning in Thulasizwe being appointed head of the Hawks, and Anwar Dramat and Shadrach Sabir being moved out of the Hawks. We saw at the National Prosecuting Authority people like Linus Breitenbach being pushed out. We saw the SARS rogue unit narrative happening. All of those were largely political campaigns. However, organized crime syndicates would have seen what was going on, and they would have seen the opportunity to capture these law enforcement agencies because they were so preoccupied with the politics that criminals were able to get a foothold. And crime intelligence is the perfect example, where you had somebody like Richard Mdluli, who was on suspension for 8 years. The crime intelligence was ravaged. There was so much fraud and corruption that was going on, and no real intelligence work being done, and so many intelligence officers were working for criminal syndicates that criminals were able to really get a foothold.
How powerful was Radovan Krejcir? I mean, as I'm reading this, and you know, this whole scene, those scenes that play themselves out in the suburb of Bedfordview, and you really tell it really well in terms of where they would meet, and you know, in terms of the kind of conversations they would be having. But the result is that there was a lot of bodies in the wake that were left in the wake of that system of the underworld.
So it depends who you believe, of course, because there's always different versions of the truth. So what happened with Radovan Krejcir is that he was able to almost build this perception, this myth around him of being this kind of mafia don. And as a result of that, all of these murders that happened were linked to him. So there is the possibility that he was incredibly dangerous. He has, of course, been convicted of some crimes. He's on trial for other murders. Or the alternative is that because of that perception, he was an easy fall guy, and the police were able to pin things on him because they weren't able to properly investigate or actually find the real gunman or the real culprits. So it depends who you believe. You know, some law enforcement officers I've spoken to say that he was kind of only a medium level kind of crime boss. But because of this perception of the fast cars and the house on Cliff Road in Bedfordview, he gave the impression of a big fish. And you spoke to quite a number of people that previously had not come forward to give their perspectives. Give us a sense of some of the stories that come through in this book. So I really wanted to get those voices that we hadn't heard from before. And that includes kind of the bad guys and the cops. So I spoke to, for example, Joey Mabasa, who was the head of crime intelligence in Gauteng. King, who apparently got a phone call the night that Lolly Jackson was killed. I spoke to Vinesh Munu, who was the head of detectives, and then I spoke to people who are so-called underworld players. So Nafiz Modek in Cape Town, who is seen as being part of the new faction taking over nightclub security. Mark Liffman, who's seen as the more established person in the security industry there. And for me, it was important to get that multitude of voices into the book so that people could get a much better understanding of that tapestry.
Mandy, I can't let you go without asking you about our new head of the Hawks. This is Godfrey Lebeya. You interacted with him as well. Just talk to me about him, and also in that conversation, talk to me a bit more about also our new head of crime intelligence, because for the first time we have people who are substantively appointed and not in an acting capacity.
It's the first time in years to us that
Yeah.
we've got a permanent national commissioner, a permanent crime intelligence head, and a permanent head of the Hawks, and that's really, really crucial for the fight against crime. So last year I met Godfrey Lebeya. Of course, he wasn't in the police. He was pushed out of the police a few years ago, and he was practicing as an advocate. And I did an interview with him for the book. And you know, if you want somebody with credentials, he's your guy. He literally wrote the textbook on organized crime. His doctorate thesis for his PhD in law was on understanding organized crime. So he's got the credentials, but more importantly, he's also got the experience. You know, he started off in Limpopo as a constable. He then moved up the ranks, and he was the person who used to receive the dockets from the detectives and file them. So he knows policing. He was a policeman for over 30 years. So he's got the experience, and he's also got the credentials. So I'm very encouraged by his appointment. And Peter Jacobs also is a career cop. He's got history in intelligence. So as head of crime intelligence, I think that he's also a good appointment in terms of bringing stability to that organization that has just been rocked by politics over the past decade.
All right, Mandy, thank you so much for coming through, and really good to see you after such a long time. That's author and journalist Mandy Wiener talking to us about her recent book. This is called The Ministry of Crime.